Been here about 4.5 years and come from that world where you can never do what we do here. When you run a business, you're competing, you're earning your revenues. They're not given to you like in government. Here, we just have to be smart enough not to spend more than we take in. Sadly, when you look, all the data's there historically. We haven't balanced a budget since the late 90s. Over 50 years, there's some things that are just criteria you need to take into consideration and maybe view it as a given. Our system, which is built on enterprise, sound regulation, not overbearing, taxes that you can pay without being a wet blanket on the economy, over 50 years, other than 2 or 3 years, happened to coincide in the Clinton years when we balanced the budget, we've never generated more than 18% of our GDP in revenue through the federal government. It's this simple. When you have high rates, you flush more into the Treasury the first couple years. You go from whatever the economic growth rate was to something 0.5 to 1.5% lower. When you cut taxes, and it was getting close, it wasn't quite there, pre-COVID, the Trump tax cuts, you're going to deplete revenues the first couple years, but then you benefit from an economy that's growing more robustly. We know all of that. The missing link here is anywhere else, you've got the rigor of the marketplace. When you're running something, it's not merciful. If you behave there like we do here, you're on the ash heap of enterprises that just don't survive in the long run. Nowhere else can you borrow now up to 30 cents on every dollar that you spend and expect that to be a good long-term business plan. I'm one, in the time I've been here, gotten along with a lot of Democrats on passing legislation that's practical. We can still do it. But when it comes to the big agenda items in terms of how much you spend, are you going to have the fortitude to do a real budget? We haven't done that. Whenever we've had moments of discipline with budget caps, sequestrations, they seem to unravel soon after we put them in place. Again, look at the numbers. We, from the time we were founded to the year 2000, had very little debt. Most of that came after World War II. The greatest generation was the deepest in debt we had ever been historically as a country. They were savers. They were investors. They were hard workers. They paid it off and built the interstate highway system, the most capital-intensive thing we've ever done as a country. When you morph into being consumers and spenders, that's what Greece did. That's what Italy did. That's what Spain did. That's what Portugal was doing until they had to get back on the wagon. Otherwise, the second largest economy in the world was going to be in trouble. They put basic discipline into their system. They spend more through the federal government there than we do, but they pay for it, generally. They're not borrowing it from future generations. We've got to find a way, as Democrats and Republicans, to take the priorities that are important to this country. And I haven't mentioned so far the real drivers of our structural deficits. That's Social Security, that is Medicare, that is Medicaid, all programs that we want to be there, but we want them to be solvent. Until we get the backbone, the political discipline, we're going to keep skirting the rigor that it takes to make this thing work long term, and you can expect more of the same. What you're seeing here today is no different. It's just punctuated with a little more drama than normal. We know we've got debt ceilings. We didn't have that, we'd probably even plow further into debt. But the numbers always win in the long run. We were running trillion-dollar deficits, both sides of the aisle generating them from the Bush years. We had COVID come along. We politically enterprised, I think, through 2 years, not recognizing what the real capability of our economy would be, and we're in a pickle. I'm going to do a little math quiz here. I did it with a bunch of reporters 3 months ago. I said, what is 1% of 30 trillion? Mr. President, would you venture to make a guess on that?
I would, but I'm not allowed to.
So, 1% of 30 trillion is 300 billion. After 30 seconds of silence, one reporter offered 300 million. I said you're off by a power of 1,000. That's how abstract these numbers become. But they become real over time when you take interest rates that have gone up 4 to 5%. Now that you know what 1% of 30 trillion is, try 5%. That's 1.5 trillion. That's what we're going to be pricing in to our debt that we're incurring. The only blueprint out there has been from the Biden administration, puts us 20 trillion further in debt in just 10 years. And all this is going to do is knock it back to just 18 trillion more. That is shameful for future generations. This institution needs to be healthy, and it needs to live within its means like households do, like local and state governments do, like all businesses do. Try talking to your banker running a 30% loss, want them to lend you the money. They would laugh you out of the office before you got into the details of really what you need. It's a bad business plan. I could go on about that, but it's been happening for now over 2 decades, both sides of the aisle. The deal is generally made by some on our side of the aisle that hold defense sacrosanct, don't want to budge at all. The other side views domestic spending more importantly. But we generally work out this same deal, which you know what the net result is? We're deeper in debt. I did take Finance 101. I spent 37 years running a business with full competition, the rigor of it, was on a school board, was on Ways and Means in our state government. It can be done. We've got the printing press in the basement. That's the Fed. When they take all this fiscal stimulus that we did, put it on their balance sheet, that's how you print money. Bad business plan for future generations. I'm here going to introduce an amendment called the No Default Amendment. We should not be flirting with this year after year when we know it's going to happen anyway, and until we put real reforms into the system, expect the same. The next time we hit the debt ceiling, when the Treasury says you're entering into extraordinary measures, that's when the clock starts. My amendment, if you can't get a real deal done with reforms addressing the things I've talked about, we're going to start paring back this place, and it's going to be across the board. Defense and domestic spending. Every 30 days, a 1% cut. If you are so thick-headed that you can't get it done then, another 30 days, you do it again. That would put some rigor into the process. But if we're not honest with the public and really address the programs that are dearest to most Americans, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, quit doing mandatory spending on things that aren't important, we're going to run this place into the ditch. And I fear for what my kids and grandkids are going to have to deal with, and I think all Americans should be worried about that. This would be at least the start of putting a little bit of discipline into an undisciplined system. Thank you, Mr. President.